My actual grandpa and I had a bond that I sometimes describe like this. It was like we were two people on the opposite sides of a two-way mirror. In him, I could see both myself and my future. And in me, he could see both himself and his past. But in that space between us, it was like there was only one person. He died when I was 15, and the last time I saw him alive, he was sitting on an old, ugly couch Mama bought him from Goodwill. Had that home oxygen mask in, that home EKG machine going boop, boop, boop. It was home hospice care. And I remember him saying to me, "Peaks and valleys, Rooster. That's what makes a story interesting. But that flatline, boy, ain't nobody gonna want to hear that." He died when I was 15, and the last time I saw him alive, he asked me to tell him a story. And I said, "Grandpa, I don't know any stories." He said, "Well, just make something up, Rooster." He called me Rooster all the time because when I was a baby, I woke him up a lot at night. He said, "Just make something up, Rooster." I said, "Grandpa, I don't know how to do that." He said, "Well, just play something on the guitar then, or something, boy. Just distract me." So I did. I went and I got his guitar, and I played him a song he taught me when he was teaching me how to play the guitar. And he fell asleep before I even got through the first chorus. He died 2 weeks later, and for years, I just felt like I was looking into mirrors and seeing nothing. I felt like I was just blindly searching for myself out there somewhere in my own future. And I know it's a weird thing to say out loud, but I think you'll understand. I wish Grandpa were dying now. Now that I have made up stories I could tell him. Stories that would make him smile. Maybe even make him proud. Like the story of Will Perjure. Now, my Ain't True and Uncle False live in a trailer park called Big Fib Trailer Park Cul-de-sac, which I know sounds contradictory, but that is because it is. And 2 trailers down from where Ain't True and Uncle False live, there's a fellow that lives there named Will Perjure. Now, Will Perjure only has one hand, so he is the only man who has never worked in any capacity at the Big Fib pea punching plant, which is the factory where they punch peas until they're black-eyed. For a long time, this was a great source of shame for Will Perjure. Now, I need to give you all some background information. My Uncle False can't cry for some medical reason, so whenever he gets upset, he sneezes. Because sadness will always find a way of escaping into the world. Well, my Uncle False has told the story about how Will Perjure lost his left hand and both of his grandparents 100+ times. But to this day, he still can't tell it without at least getting a runny nose. Here's the story. Don T. Perjure, Will Perjure's grandpa, was without question the greatest pea puncher in the history of Big Fib. Y'all, nobody else was even close. That man could punch half again as many peas as everybody else at the factory, and then he'd stay and work overtime. Come home exhausted, sure, but with a handsome paycheck and delicious fists to boot. Now here is how the factory worked. There was a giant platform up there, real high, you see, and all the punchers would stand up on that platform. And then the plant manager would release what was unfortunately known as a pea waterfall.
No.
Now, this was the method that all punchers adopted from Don T. Perjure. It was his method that they adopted. Don T. and those punchers, they'd reach out and cup a handful of peas out of the pea waterfall, and then they'd get to punching. And that is how you make black-eyed peas. But after a while, what happens? Your arm gets tired. And that's when a lot of fellas would take a break. Not Don T. Perjure. That's whenever he would switch, cup left, punch right. Yeah, before Don T. Perjure came along, ambidextrous cupped pea punching was unheard of. Now, when Will Perjure lost his left hand, he was 7 years old. And nothing traumatic or dramatic happened to the boy. I need y'all to understand that. He just laid his left hand down somewhere and walked away. 7-year-olds lose stuff. He didn't even realize it until he got all the way home to his grandma's trailer, and she's like, "Willie, where's your left hand?" And he went, and pretty much from that point forward, Don T. Perjure Perjure, Will's grandpa, he stopped sleeping because he'd work a full shift and then he'd come home and pick up his grandson and go searching for that lost left hand, wherever it was, just trying desperately to retrace Will's steps or touches, I guess, just desperately trying to find that boy's left hand. But then after about a week, had to call off the hunt, turn his thoughts toward the positive. How in the world was Don T. Perjure going to make a productive pea puncher out of that one-handed grandson of his? Well, Don T. was a legend for a reason, friends. He's going to find a way. Now, this was the only time in his career that Don T.'s production at the factory slowed, because he'd go in and work a normal 8-hour shift, the first 6 hours of which he would punch in the normal ambidextrous cupped way, but those last 2 hours or so he'd spend just punching with one hand, just desperately trying to figure out a way to teach his grandson how to survive. And then he'd go home, and on next to no sleep, he would just stare at the ceiling of his trailer every night, just coming up with new one-handed pea punching theories. And then go back into work with no sleep at all. And then he'd spend that first 6 hours or so in the normal way. But then that last 2 hours he would spend trying out his new theories. Just desperately trying to figure out a way to teach his grandson how to survive. Well, after about a week of this, the plant manager had enough. The plant manager came to him and said, Don T., I'm trying to turn a blind eye toward this one-handed pea punching you're attempting to perfect because I feel bad for you and your grandboy. But you've gone from legend to liability, man. You need to go back to being the ambidextrous cupped pea punching legend that you are. I'm giving you one more day of this. One more day. Well, that's when things got desperate. It was that final, fateful Friday. And Don T. Perjure decided to spend the entire shift punching with just one hand. He asked for overtime, but upper management said no because they knew he'd just use it to fight the inevitable. And so, all day long, 7 hours and 38 minutes of his shift he punched with one hand. And at 4:38 p.m., the legend himself gave up. He just stopped punching. And there are people that were working there at the time that are still alive, and you can ask them. Yes, you could hear the clatter of peas falling in the background, but when Don T. Perjure stopped punching, it felt in that factory like you could hear a pin drop. 4:38 p.m., and the legend gave up. Looked down at his shoes in defeat. A single tear rolled off his nose, exploded against his left boot, and that's when the epiphany hit. Don T. reached out, cupped a handful of peas, threw them against his kick, and he had done it. He had discovered pea kicking. He kept up with every fella at the factory for 10 solid minutes. People could not believe what they were seeing. Uncle Fultz was a trainee there at the time, and he'll tell you, it was such a beautiful thing to behold, he had to put a finger under his nose. Now, about 2 weeks after Don T. Perjure died, don't worry, you will understand in good time. About 2 weeks after Don T. Perjure died, Mrs. Perjure, Will Perjure's grandma, she started walking dogs around Big Fib as a way to make ends meet. And she had these 3 dogs on a leash, and it was this unfortunate overcastish day, and she was doing that dog talk that people do. You know, she's been a good little bear's puppy today. She's been a good bear's puppy. When a random bolt of literal lightning picked her up and threw her 15 feet. Now look, those dogs were fine, and Mrs. Perjure lived, but her brain got stuck in that dog talk. That's not a good thing in a tiny town like Big Fib. Everybody knows everybody and asks you how you doing. What are you going to say? She's been a good girl today. She has been. No. She holed herself up in her trailer. She never talked to anyone ever again. Now, Big Fib folk are good folk. They ain't going to let you starve. So what Big Fib folk would do, they brought their dogs over to Mrs. Perjure's place. And she bought 2 used treadmills, put them in the backyard. She'd coax your dog up onto the treadmill with a treat, tie off the leash, press start, go and watch a soap opera, come back out, switch dogs. These were the day-to-day workings of Perjure dog walking. But that silent treatment, that extended to Will Perjure as well. See, when Will Perjure lost his grandpa, it was also the last time he ever heard from his grandma. And that is what scarred that boy. He was was a year to the day after Don T. Perjure's death that Mrs. Perjure broke into the pea punching plant after hours, climbed up onto that platform where her husband had become a legend, threw herself off into the vat of mushy green, and drowned. And since that time, Will Perjure has been the cul-de-sac's son. He has been raised by our community. And until he saved the pea punching plant, y'all, until Will Perjure saved the pea punching plant, he was not a happy boy. Uncle Faltz one time called a psychiatrist what Uncle Faltz likes to call a thought doctor. And the psychiatrist said that Will Perjure suffers from depression because he feels things he can't quite describe. But I don't think that's depression, not in Will Perjure's specific case. I think those feelings that he has, that he can't quite describe, we all know what that is. That's his lost left hand out there, wherever it is, blindly feeling about for where it belongs. Now, how did Don T. Perjure die? All right. At 4:54 p.m., 16 minutes after discovering pea kicking, he was still keeping up with every fella at the factory, but he was getting tired. His leg was getting tired, and he decided it was time to switch feet. But he didn't take into account the fact that there would be a pile of green peas down there around his right boot. And so whenever he went down to switch feet, he slipped, fell forward, and he joined the pea waterfall. And they say it happened like it was in slow motion. The entire way down, he was scooping and kicking, determined to find a way to teach his grandson how to survive. Scooping and kicking, not the frenzied flailings of a dying man, not even a hint of fear or anguish on his face until he was separated from us. When Uncle Faltz tells this story, he always ends it the exact same way. He always says, "That's what happiness is, boy. Being so passionate about whatever it is you're doing, you ain't even got time to brace yourself for the end." Now, how did Will Perjure save the pea punching plant? I wish I could tell you. But that's the thing about Big Fib Trailer Park Cul-de-sac. Everybody you ask, they're going to give you a different story. That's just the way that place works, you know? So all I can do is tell you what I know. Will Perjure was offered all kinds of gifts and accolades for saving the pea punching plant. But when it came time for him to reap the rewards of his service, he told everybody all he wanted in the world. All he wanted was to meet the pea punching plant manager at the pea punching plant after hours alone. Uncle Faltz told me that the way Will saved the pea punching plant, you know that plant manager? He's the only fellow that can run that place. Well, what happened was his heart attacked him. And so Will ran out and he found his lost left hand and he brought it back to Big Fib. And they had it surgically implanted in the plant manager's chest, and now it squeezes his heart for him every day. Involuntary as breathing. Will Perjure walked into the pea punching plant after hours, and he looked up at that platform up there. That platform where his grandma had drawn her last breath. That platform where his grandpa had become a legend. Will Perjure climbed up onto that platform and he waited. Ain't True told me that the way Will saved the pea punching plant. You know, Will Perjure's grandma's dog walking business? Well, Will Perjure turned that treadmill dog walking business into a very successful pyramid scheme that got very popular in the 90s. And that's how he was able to bail the pea punching plant out of bankruptcy. The plant manager walked in, saw Will up on that platform, and he smiled at first, but then immediately that smile fell. Because he knew what Willie Perjure was there to do, and so that plant manager reached into his pocket and pulled out a pile of keys, and he made a beeline toward that green button over there on the wall. He walked as fast as he could toward that green button, and he stuck the key in the keyhole next to that green button. He turned that key, and then he said, "Willie, are you ready?" I asked Will Perjure personally, and he told me it doesn't matter how he saved the pea punching plant. Y'all, how is not the issue here. The only thing that matters is somehow that boy was able to keep something his grandpa loved alive. Willie said, "Yeah, I'm ready." And the plant manager pressed the green button. And there it was. The pea waterfall. Willie had never seen it with his own eyes, and that's why he closed them. He just stood there for a minute, letting the wind of it rush over him, and he thought about his grandma. And he thought about his grandpa. But he knew what he was there to do. Will Perjure stepped to the edge of that platform, and with his one hand, Will Perjure wrote into the pea waterfall, "I am a man my grandpa would be proud of."